Right, I think we're good to get going. So welcome everybody to Cabinet. I promise not to say the words Kushti or Monge too at any point during this meeting, because I know that they are newsworthy. So there you go. But one thing I will say is incredibly well done to the England team for Sunday. You would have seen, you would have seen sort of the announcement that we made yesterday in terms of the nomination for Saka for Freedom of the Borough, and I would say it's quite disgraceful that we saw what we saw in the 48 hours that followed what was an incredible and valiant effort by that team, who were carrying sort of the weight of the nation on their shoulders. And what we've seen in the 48 hours since is really quite awful and shocking. So I think it's only right that if you step up and you represent your nation in a way like that, that you should be lionised, not booed. And therefore, I hope that nomination goes through to the Freedom of the Borough Committee. I hope the Freedom of the Borough Committee meets soon and they approve that nomination. And we can send a really clear and strong message that this is Saka's home. It will always be his home. And he is very much welcome and free to be in the London Borough of Ely. So on that note, we will go into the agenda. So minutes of the last meeting. Oh no, first declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No urgent matters, no matters to be considered in private. We do have an urgent matter. No, we do have an urgent matter, apologies, which is the COVID-19 local support grant. And you've got the reason set out in the cabinet cover as the reason why. We do have apologies from Councillors Manro and Councillor Wall. Also item 14, I'm told, which is fielding, and again, the reasons are set out in the report. Councillors Wall and Manro give their apologies. Councillor Manro is currently self-isolating and therefore not able to leave his property. And Councillor Wall, we will congratulate for becoming a grandmother again to healthy twin grandchildren. So congratulations to her. She's currently not in London, so again, not able to be here in person. And it tells you sort of why the rules need to change. So, minutes, are we happy? Brilliant. No appointments. So we will go straight into the main agenda items, and because Councillor Wall is not here, you've got me for the Broadway Living business plan. I'll introduce it very briefly because I know that Councillor Malcolm wants to ask some questions. But as we all know, Broadway Living is the council's wholly owned council house building company, specifically set up to ensure that we are delivering genuinely affordable homes, and doing that using our own land, using our own money, our own capacity and our own people to deliver that. Now, it will be a regular feature of both cabinet and audit agendas that you will see a 6-monthly business plan. Just like any business, it has to deal with the fact that there are macroeconomic challenges that we face, like, for example, the hike in corporation tax, which puts a hole in the current finances, but not a hole that is not insurmountable. And the way that we're therefore approaching it is to bring forward to cabinet the first set of sites that we are effectively asking cabinet to draw down the existing borrowing capacity that has been previously agreed, and to get us out of the ground and have us therefore put those into the baseline and really get us cracking. So that's what the report's about. Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in support of the initiative of Broadway Living, but obviously the devil is in the detail, and it's not a simple process to make this work. But if we look at 3.5.16 to 3.520, we can see there are a lot of big issues which have hit or will hit us in the future: corporation tax, inflation, planning issues like planning decisions like Gurnell. We can see the recommended action in the short term will probably work to bring forward some of those aforementioned issues and projects. But when tranche 1 is delivered, what will be done to avoid some of the future problems? And then in my second question relates to paragraph 7.1, which is positive news, where the actual quality in terms of zero carbon status is moved toward, not quite, but it's in the right direction totally. What would need to be done to move it to a zero carbon status? So what we're not doing that we could do, and why are we not aiming for that sort of now?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say, look, one of the, in terms of where we are as a council in the grand scheme of organisations being involved in the business of building houses, is that we're really clear about what we're trying to achieve, which is maximising the number of genuinely affordable housing. What we're not in the business of doing is trying to generate sort of massive profits and shareholder profits that then go to buying rich cars and big houses for the people who run those companies. And on that basis, what we're able to do is to operate in a market, and it is a market. It's a market that's pretty broken in terms of the big issues that face it, in terms of how the planning system works, about the cost of land in London, but also the big macroeconomic things that impact it, so corporation tax, etc. We understand those risks. We understand those risks as a council, just as the industry also understands those risks. Things like escalating costs of the materials that we need to build homes, partly caused by Brexit and supply chain issues. Likewise, the cost of labour going up because we don't have enough people who are skilled in construction. But understanding those risks is absolutely fundamental to making sure that we get this right. And while we know that there are a package of sites that we can bring forward now that are managed as much as you can, manage those risks, they're out of the way. We'll bring forward future schemes, thinking about all of those risks, making sure that we always make the right decision, and we always make a decision fully understanding what that risk profile looks like. And we're going to do that in the knowledge that we've got the call-in process. We're going to do that in the knowledge that we've got the scrutiny process, but we're also going to do that in the knowledge that we've also got the audit process. Not only are we going to take Broadway Living to future audit meetings, but we're also going to take all of the council's wholly owned companies, use audit. It's a bit like a public works. The phrase has gone from my head. A public accounts committee to make sure that members have got even more of that oversight of the decisions that we're taking. In terms of 7.1 and even 7.2 as well, hopefully you will have seen the design guide that Broadway Living has produced that really sets out what our ambitions are for both social, environmental and economic goods that we're going to get from the building of those homes. One of those is about making sure that we are as carbon neutral as possible. Now that's a huge challenge that the entire industry is going to have to face with things like embodied carbon in buildings. We can't get away from the fact that we've got to build buildings with concrete. We can't get away from the fact that we've got to build buildings with steel if we're going to meet sort of the building requirements, the regulations that require us to do that. What we can do is we can offset, we can do is use sustainable materials, we can look at our supply chains, and we can look at all of those things to minimise the environmental impact and damage that is done from the building of homes. And likewise, long term, you'll have seen the Architects Journal campaign. We need to make the finances of reuse and retrofit more sustainable so that it doesn't always just become the cheapest option to demolish and rebuild, but we've got different ways of being able to deliver different projects. Okay, so if there are no questions or comments from members, the recommendations are set out in the report. Are members content to proceed? Brilliant. So over to Councillor Donnelly, who is going to take us through the report. Go for it.
On the next item. Yeah. Thank you. I won't take you through paragraph by paragraph, but just to set the scene, this is an annual requirement for us to set out a picture, a medium-term financial strategy, and the likely impact on our budget for the next 3 years. It's a somewhat anomalous thing to be seen to be doing, to set out medium-term financial strategy in the total absence of any medium-term or indeed short-term information about the council's income. But that is nonetheless what we're required to do. The government's long advertised review of local government finance is proving as elusive as its long promised review of social care finance But in the absence of either of those, and of course the second is an enormously important part of the first, as far as any local authority is concerned, like us, we must proceed on the basis in front of you. What it shows us is that for the next 3 years, as for more than the preceding 10 years, we must assume reductions in our budget, and inevitably in the round, that will lead to cuts in at least some of our services, which is to be deplored. The absence of any vision and strategy at central government level has become a crisis at the level of those in the council's employ seeking to provide those services. I see Councillor Malcolm has come this evening to discuss this paper, and I welcome that. Well, I welcome it provisional on what it is he's going to ask me. I noticed that Councillor Stafford and his group have again chosen not to come to discuss the challenge that faces us, but I bet my bottom dollar that at some point down the line, he will come to complain about every single decision we make that is a consequence of the numbers that we see in front of us this evening. And I give advance notice that I may not be wholly temperate in my responses to him as and when he does so. We're not on YouTube, are we? Oh, yes, we are. Hooray! Perhaps he's watching. So I will leave it at that. Within the budget, there is provision for a sensible reinforcement of our reserves. There is provision for a sensible expansion of our ability to provide services. But necessarily, when one's looking at, for example, for the next financial year, a shortfall of over £23 million, and where even if we were able to apply the same council tax and social care precept that we did this year, we would still be some £16 million short.
Report in 4.2.2, there are the 9 sort of priority outcomes which were there for the past 3 or 4 years. Is there likely to be a change of those in terms of how we're going to measure some of the different outcomes we're measuring, given some of the council changes recently may have an impact on that? And thirdly, in item 9 of the agenda, I'm not speaking on that particularly, but the Microsoft agreements, you can see clearly you've got roughly the same amount of licenses for the past couple of years, but there is a large rate of inflation in that area of IT, which is a concern moving forwards, given we are going to need IT at a greater level in the future than we do now. So what are the plans that you're doing with the officers to reduce some of those problems that you're getting with IT-related inflation?
So, Councillor Donny, you want to you do the first part, I'll do the second part, and then we'll wait for the third part for the next agenda item. How about that? Yeah.
I can give a general steer about the third part. So, in the first part, how we're likely to do it? Well, we will, as we always do, review all of our options. So the new administration is taking a more root and branch review of how we are structured and how we will best provide our services. Having said that, and I think you know, we have a legal obligation to balance our budget. And given that we put in for illustration purposes, the effect of 1.99% council tax increase and a 3% precept on social care, it is worth flagging that as the rules stand today, the government, we have exhausted the number of precepts that we are allowed to levy. One must hope that something will happen, because one of the problems that we have with these budgets is things often turn out to be, we'll still be worse off next year. We may be slightly less worse off than this paper says, but we don't know how much worse off, and we don't know when we'll know how much less worse off we will be. So the planning of the kind that you're talking about is actually made even more difficult, because the landscape changes very late in the day in ways which are unpredictable. So we don't know that we'll be allowed to take another social care precept. One hopes that some kind of common sense around the provision of social care will finally prevail, but we don't know if it will, and we don't know when it will. But no realistic person can expect us to fill a gap, whether it's 16 million or 14 million or 12 million, without services of some kind being impacted. Now, it is July of 2021. It would be wrong of me to speculate, what the situation will be come April, May of 2022. But I can say that we don't have reason to be optimistic about all aspects of all the services that we provide. And I know, I hope that he would support us in the complaints that we make about the way in which the government puts us in a corner on finance, and does so year after year after year.
And on new priorities, your colleague, Councillor Ball, tuned in via a Microsoft app, I would say, to Overview and Scrutiny Committee only last week from his holiday destination, and shared with us his lemon wedge, which was a welcome addition to an OSC meeting. But what I will say is we do, of course, have full council next week, at which we will be discussing the council plan that sets out the administration's 3 new top priorities, as well as the 9 core outcomes. I'll leave it there because we can save the discussion for next week. But papers, if they've not already landed, will be accessible very shortly.
And just on that third point, leaving aside the Microsoft contract itself, which I'll speak of, we are taking as holistic approach to the provision of our IT communication services as we can do. We're about to enter into a new relationship, the contract with BT, which will give us more for less. Now, I mean, and that really is the driver that we have. But we have a need to improve what we provide in IT. That's an absolute requirement on us, and at the same time, our income shrinks. So it's one of the areas where we're having to almost reconcile the irreconcilable. People rightly have increased expectations of us in the provision of IT, including meetings such as this one. But the money to provide those services will have to be found from somewhere.
Cabinet, any further comments, questions, contributions? Okay, so if we are happy to agree the recommendations in the report. Agreed. So Councillor Donnelly, back to you for the enterprise agreement licence renewal. The highlight of this evening.
Councillor Malcolm has trailed this very skillfully. Yes, we can't survive without the IT equipment and the software that powers it. Microsoft is still the bedrock of most systems that are run. Microsoft doesn't sell doesn't itself sell these licenses, but it requires us to buy licenses from certain pre-approved providers. These providers are extremely similar in what they charge, extremely similar in the nature of the services they provide, and extremely similar for the most part in the quality of the service that they provide it with. So in terms of our retendering exercise, we are satisfied that our current provider ticks the boxes as well as any other provider, and as a result minimises the disruption that would result from changing provider. So the recommendation is to renew the licenses with the provider that we currently have.
Are we agreed? Councillor Mahfouz.
Never had I thought that I would ever have to follow such an exciting report, but I think excellently delivered. And firstly, if I can go on, before I go on to this report, and I think it's not totally unrelated, is that if I can echo the comments that the leader has made about Bukayo Saka, an absolute hero in all true England fans' eyes, a 19-year-old, let's not forget, without whom we wouldn't even have got to the finals of the Euros if he wasn't playing. And certainly an inspiration at my son's school, where he used to attend, as well as to school kids across the borough and across the country. And I certainly look forward to the day that he brings it home, and of course that home being Greenford and this borough in the future. Now, if colleagues can hark back their memories back to October last year, the government at the time said that they shouldn't be funding meals for children outside of school holiday during school holiday periods. Back then, of course, councils, including our own, local restaurant owners, Marcus Rashford, stepped up to the plate to cover the costs and lobby the government to do the same going forward. At the time, the government, of course, missed what was clearly an open goal on the subject. However, they did succumb to the pressure and finally coughed up. Since then, we've been supporting families over the school holidays, over Christmas and half terms subsequently. Now, what this report looks to do, and it is urgent, and I'm grateful for the support of the opposition to make sure that it is exempt from call-in, is that the government only a few weeks ago decided that they just realised that, of course, summer is coming up, and without further funding, that would mean that children would be left without vouchers and support over that period of time. So they looked to put in place free school meal and support for free school meal and vulnerable children over the summer period, and they felt that that should be extended. However, Cabinet, we should be aware that the decision didn't come with the necessary funding allocation to cover the costs at the rate that we've been funding for the past few weeks and months. I'm not sure what they felt this summer was different to any of the other school holidays periods. And so tonight, I'm asking Cabinet colleagues to agree to provide sufficient vouchers to support children on free school meals and those eligible under 5 to get them through the full 6-week period over the summer holidays. This additional funding that we'd be agreeing this evening that we'd be putting in as a council will ensure that 3,280 children will get vouchers at the same rate as previous holiday periods for that full summer. Had we stuck with the government funding that's been allocated, we'd be seeing either a position where 3,280 children would be missing out completely, or all children that would be eligible would have missed out on 2 whole weeks of funding. So I hope Cabinet will agree that to leave families in such a position would be utterly unacceptable. And so we're going to make sure, in addition to this, that the vouchers are distributed the week commencing the 19th of July, and that will ensure that families have those funds at the start of the school holidays. In addition to that, there is the HAF, that's the Holidays Activity and Food Programme, which will support any eligible families for 4 days a week for 4 weeks over the summer. And if families would like to book on, they can do so on the Ealing Families Directory website, and I'd encourage them to do so. So, Chair, I'd encourage colleagues to support this step, but call on the government to do the right thing and properly fund feeding our children this summer and going forward.
Any contributions? Absolutely share the sentiment, Councillor Mahfouz. So I'm sure we will be very happy to agree the recommendations. And Councillor Mahfouz, back to you.
Thank you, colleagues. So, Chair, my portfolio is decent living incomes, and one of the administration's top 3 priorities, as we'll see with the council plan next week, is to create and get our residents into good jobs. Ealing and West London has been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. We've seen job losses in hospitality, tourism, aviation, and the events management industries in particular, which caused a tripling of unemployment, hitting our diverse and disadvantaged communities hardest. In Ealing alone, that's equated to nearly 15,000 extra unemployed people. And in addition to that, of course, all of those people who are furloughed, who will be concerned about losing their jobs, where that cliff edge comes in the next few weeks, where furlough will end, but they don't have jobs to go back to. Working as a collective of West London boroughs, led by us here in Ealing, we've successfully bid for money that will allow us to work with over 12,000 additional residents. The programmes that are detailed within this report have enabled Ealing Council, on behalf of the West London Alliance, to create a West London Alliance hub for job brokerage across the boroughs to help employers to find good local staff. So far, through our work with the NHS alone, 1,300 people have been recruited for the North West London NHS max vaccination centres and helped to deliver 2.5 million vaccine doses to local residents. If I can just refer to one example, Chair, Yolanda came to use our service in January, feeling very down, understandably having lost her job back in April because of COVID. She spent the previous 9 months looking for work with no success, but with the support of the service, I'm delighted to say that Yolanda started with the NHS as a vaccinator only a few weeks later. Other employers, if I can call to them, any of those listening this evening, if you're looking to find good local staff, get in touch. If we have unemployed residents listening this evening who are looking to find work, they should also get in touch and look at the WorkWest website. But finally, Chair, if I can come to the technical points of the report, in order for us to enable this increase in provision, the report seeks to approve approvals to required to obtain the funding, including from the DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, and European Social Fund income, to vary and extend 2 contracts with the Shore Trust Limited for Work and Health Programme and the Jobs Entry Targeted Support Programme. The variation would be in place for September to 2021. Firstly, to extend the Work and Health Programme contract term for a further period of 2 years. Secondly, to increase volumes of places made available for the Work and Health Programme. And on the other hand, to extend the JETS contract, that's the Jobs Entry Target Support Programme, by up to 1 year, and equally for that one, to increase the volumes of places made available to support that programme as well.
And I do have to say, of all the programmes that the council could be involved in, and all of the work that we do to support people into decent living incomes, what better example of making sure that those who are most at risk of not having that ability to generate a decent living income have the ability to do that. And not only do we know that it changes the lives of those who are in that programme, but it demonstrates that employers and good business can come to the table and find great staff and great people to fulfil roles that we know need to be fulfilled. Any thoughts or comments, contributions from members of Cabinet? So on that basis, are we happy with the recommendations?
people still have the opportunity to put forward any objections, and then if that was agreed, we then make those schemes permanent. We do need to do it now so that it's all in place for September when the schools come back and they're able to continue running the schemes. I think, Chair, this is a really brilliant example of active travel and how much of a difference it can make to people's lives. We know as a council, we're really committed to getting people to make that modal shift from using their cars to instead using active modes such as cycling and walking. We're trying to encourage people to do that. And the reason we're doing that, the big reason that we're doing that is because it's going to help reduce our emissions. It's going to have an impact on the climate, on all of the issues that come under climate change, including affecting the weather, droughts, in floods, not having sustainable food sources for the future, all of those big things. But there's lots of much more day-to-day things that can also come out of active travel. And I think this School Streets programme really shows that. So we, asked people about, how they got to school before we brought in these measures and after. And there was an increase in all of the schools in pupils and in staff walking and cycling to school. So basically, all of these schemes did what we wanted them to do. They've got people to make that difficult step, that modal change of switching from dropping people in the car to school or going to work in a school by car to instead walking or cycling or even scooting, as some kids have been doing. And some of these school streets, it's actually really lovely being there in the morning. I've got one myself in my own ward of North Holt Mandeville in Willow Tree School. And it's just great seeing the kids whizzing down the road that's now closed off for that period in the morning and in the evening when the schools are open and shut. And I think, local residents and, the school are used to now that those two periods, the roads being closed, but for the rest of the day, the road is open. The evaluation, as I say, did find that there was an increase in active travel, so it's exactly what we're after. Also, there was an increase in road safety in most of the schools. I think one of the things that came back, though, was that we're at the moment using volunteers. That's how the scheme's been brought in. So we've got volunteers holding barriers to keep the roads closed in the morning. And, in some cases that can be a little bit difficult for the school to staff. So what we're proposing is that in making these schemes permanent, that they would all now be enforced using ANPR cameras. So that's automatic number plate recognition cameras. Perryvale School is already run in that way because it was funded slightly differently and it kind of started in advance of the other schemes. So now we'd be looking at all 10 of the permanent schemes being enforced using ANPR, and that will reduce the input from the school. They won't have to have volunteers out there in the morning and the evening, and it would make it easier for the school, and I think will be a positive step forward. We are also going to extend the staff exemption, which currently exists for Perryvale, but not for the other schemes. That staff exemption will also be applied, the removal of the staff exemption will be applied on the other 9 schemes. Going forward, people working in schools, in the relevant schools, will need to arrive in before the virtual barrier goes down, or else they too will need to get a sustainable mode of transport to the school in the morning. And we are already finding that staff are reducing their use of cars. And the schools are aware of this and are happy with that. So that can be included in this report. Blue badge exemption is already applied in all of the schemes, but what we'll be doing is asking people to apply for that going forward, because at these temporary schemes, you just turn up and kind of wave your blue badge at the people working on the barrier. But when we've got ANPR, that won't work. ANPR doesn't recognise the blue badge. So we will be asking for people to register if they either live in the school street, or we're also including people who are dropping people off in the school street, either to work or to go to school. So it is wider than people who just live on the school street. But that exemption will be applied, and we'll be asking people to register. And I think just overall, there is some very good analysis, and there are independent reports with this report that look at the impact on traffic, and also on what parents and staff and local residents thought of the schemes. I think all the schemes are supported by parents and staff. I think all but one school and only marginally supported them. And residents, there was a bit more of a split, with I think 5 out of the 12 of the schools, residents not being fully supportive of the schemes. But 2 of those schemes we are not bringing forward to make permanent. And the reason is because we think they need a bit more work, and they need to be slightly wider than they currently are, because there's broader problems in the immediate area of the school that need sorting out. So we'll bring those back at a future date, working with the 2 schools. Those 2 schools are Gifford and Vickers Green. Those 2 schools we'll bring back at a later date. But I think overall, I would say this is a brilliant example, as I say, of active travel, how it can work in reality, how it can have a really great impact on road safety, on just the enjoyment of kids going to school in the morning, and on actually getting people to make that shift in a way that I think is sustainable. And what we want to do now is to move on beyond these 12 schools and actually roll this out to other schools in the borough. So that is our next step as a council. We're absolutely committed to school streets and to active travel, and we'll be looking at rolling out this scheme to other schools where it works for them. We'll be working with those schools closely and seeing where we can identify further work we can do. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Costigan. And I would say on school streets, I think it's a great example of how you take a small community, a school, the parents, teachers and children, and you can introduce them to active travel and work with them to design schemes and to understand the impact that they can therefore make, and cascade therefore that learning out to a wider community who can then come to understand why active travel is so important. And so it's a comprehensive piece of work, a trial in Perivale that was rapidly expanded to a significant number of new locations. And I would hope that the learning from this school streets programme can be applied, and we can really think about the number of school streets therefore we can get in other parts of the borough and across the borough as a whole. Any other thoughts or contributions? Okay, so if we're happy to agree the recommendations in the report. And the final cabinet agenda item, Councillor Magpal.
Thank you, Chair. So this report seeks approval to award a contract for the construction of facilities for additionally resource provision at Fielding Primary School for children with an education, health and care plan. This is part of the council's programme to provide additional school places for children with special education needs and enables pupils to remain, why am I still wearing my mask? In a mainstream school with additional support who may otherwise require a place in a special school or one-to-one support. Cabinet previously approved the award of a contract for these works in May this year, but the contractor subsequently withdrew their tender due to increased costs from their suppliers. So the next tenderer in line has confirmed that they can stand by their tender price and set up the site over the summer. Cabinet is therefore asked to approve the award of the contract to H. Carolan Construction Limited in the sum of 1.382 million, funded from the existing approved schools SEND expansion programme budget. Thank you.
Okay, any thoughts, contributions or questions? If not, are we happy to agree the recommendations in the report? Fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of this evening's proceedings. So all there is left to say is thank you very much for being here. And for our, I believe, 7 viewers online, you're very welcome. And 2 of those who I'm sure are cabinet members who couldn't be with us today. Our next meeting will be held in September 2021, and we will confirm the date with you all shortly. Thank you very much.